It's now my pleasure to introduce Jeffrey Vanness. Jeffrey is currently the managing partner at Compass Point Logistics, LLC. He is an international development professional with more than 20 years of experience working for nonprofit organizations, the US government, and intergovernmental organizations promoting civil society, political processes, and good governance in developing countries. Jeffrey served previously as a resident country director for the International Republican Institute in Bangladesh and East Timor, and as a democracy and governance advisor for USAID in Washington, D.C. and Dhaka. So, Jeffrey, from your mountaintop in the Shenandoah, please share your views with us.
Thank you. Happy to be part of this distinguished panel and to have such a distinguished audience there. I probably are speaking with the least amount of moral authority on this panel, but I will try to make up with it with some bold statements. And I want to start off by saying that when we talk about election integrity in Bangladesh, I think we already start off losing. I've been listening and thinking, can we tell the difference about what we're saying here in 2023 versus what we would have said 5 years ago and what we would have said 10 years ago? And what, unfortunately, we might be saying 5 years into the future. As Antonio, as Brigadier Shakawat said, and as Mr. Kabir, indicated, that the conditions aren't there to have a free, fair, participatory, inclusive election in just 3 months from now. We know that elections isn't a single day. It's not an event. It's a process, and it's a process that takes place in a context. So when I was at USAID, I often explained to stakeholders and embassies that even if you had a magic wand, because the question would be, what do we need to do to have a free and fair election? Well, even with a magic wand, you can't erase the context and the climate. Even if we got tomorrow had the dialogue that we were looking for, even if we had changes in the laws and the legal structures that accommodates everyone's wishes, if it happened tomorrow, it can't erase what's taken place over the last 5 years and 10 years in there. It would probably be a good thing, but the scene is already set for this 2014 election, and I strongly think that there is a misplaced emphasis on elections. That's what I used to do for a living. I absolutely believe that elections are important. Election integrity is important. They're very important to Bangladeshis who have had, when I was there for the end of the state of emergency in the 2018 election, it's always wonderful to see how celebratory these days were, how participatory they were. Bangladeshis, like all of us, have the right to choose our own representatives. It's a fundamental human right. It's in the constitution of Bangladesh. They're absolutely important, but I think we would do better to recognize that elections are important, not because they're the end point, but because they are a beginning. They're the beginning of what comes next. And democracies don't hold elections so that political parties can divide up power amongst themselves. Democracies hold elections so that the people can decide who's going to have to be responsible for solving problems. And try not to quote me out of context, but I'm going to say that Bangladesh doesn't need a free and fair election in January 2024. I hope that got your attention. We've already seen that. We've been down that road. As my previous panelists have said, that election in 2008 was pretty good. I mean, I know the international observers labeled it very credible. I was the country director for the International Republican Institute. I'd been there 2 years at that point, and in IRI's report, it was written a time that called the election a timely and critical step forward for Bangladesh's democracy, where the results of the election accurately reflected the collective will of the Bangladeshi people and were conducted in a comprehensive and fair electoral environment, free of irregularities, serious enough to question the outcome. Brigadier Shekhawat talked about 2008, and then he said 2014 things had changed. Well, what happened? Well, it didn't take 5 years to see that change. Pretty soon after that ninth parliament was seated, after what, for shorthand, I'll call that free and fair election, the opposition started boycotting their seats in parliament for a variety of reasons. Changes were made in the constitution in their absence, which further prolonged the antagonism. And in fact, less than a year after this democratic election, the democratically elected Awami League government was essentially practicing one-party rule by default. That's the start of the situation we're in now. This situation that we are in now in 2023 started very shortly after a free and fair election, one that resembles an election that we're all sitting here asking for right now. I do want to differ with Mr. Kabir when he says that people know what a good election looks like. My experience has been when I asked Bangladeshi political leaders who have asked for a free and fair election, what does that mean? They have difficulty coming up with a definition, and simplifying it. When I ask them, well, how will we know if it was a free or fair election? The answer is almost universally, if we win, it was a free and fair election. If we don't, there must have been irregularities. It wasn't free and fair. This is unfortunate that this is the view, and it's impossible to go into election and changing those views. Okay, all right. That's not particularly helpful, but what I do want to do, instead of talking about election integrity, is think not about election day or the event, but propose that we start talking about a different standard, one that we can possibly do better against. And I'm not discounting the importance of the rule of law, the freedom of expression, the rights of the people, the laws of the land. And yes, international election observers are going to come and go in January 2014, and they're probably not going to tell us anything that we don't already know better than them. But if we define integrity in terms of how well the election serves its purpose, then we can do better. Now, I propose that the purpose of an election isn't to cast votes and to count them accurately, etc. I'm being simplistic. But I think we can judge the quality on the election on whether it succeeds in producing a government and an opposition willing to work together to address the concerns of the Bangladeshi people. They don't necessarily have to agree with each other. They don't necessarily have to agree on solutions. They can be adversarial. That's the meaning of opposition. But they do have to work together. This buys us a little bit more time. It means that we aren't going to be able to talk about the integrity of the election on election day. We have to wait and to see what becomes of the parliament, in this case, that it produces. Does it produce a parliament that's going to work and continue working for the full tenure of the members of parliament that were elected? So in 2008, I talked about that free and fair election, but in hindsight, 15 years down the road, without questioning the technical competence of those who conducted that election and the spirit in which it was conducted. At the time, I thought it worked. I now see it didn't, because the results didn't stick. The people who were elected were unable to work together, and it hurt the Bangladeshi people. And I think that when we talk about election integrity, yes, the process is important, but I think the result that we end up with and have to live with for the next 5 years is something we need to be continually evaluating on an ongoing basis before we can talk about how well that 2024 election went. Thank you.